All right, today we're talking about, technology costs. They're so expensive. In fact, it's probably the number one or number two cost for most businesses. But today we're going to talk about how you can reduce those technology costs and make it good decisions for your business around those technology costs. My guest today is Mark Friedler. He has been in and around technology and started a zillion companies in and out of the technology world. And so I'll tell you more about him in a second. So stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show, and every week I get the privilege to talk to interesting and smart, savvy CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. We've had Netflix and Grubhub and Redfin and Gusto. So many great episodes here. Check out the archives. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, our company where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com to learn more about what we do. All right, my guest today is Mark Friedler. He's the CEO of GigX Inc., which is an IT and technology strategy consultancy, kind of like coaches to companies that want to manage their technology costs. And few people are as qualified to focus on that as Mark is. Really diverse background, started a number of different companies in industries ranging from online gaming to fintech, ad tech, media. He's been was early involved in crypto, all these different industries. So it's really going to be a fascinating dive in his background. Mark, great to have you here today. I love to start by getting to know what people were like as a kid. And I oftentimes prompt people beforehand by saying, did you do any lemonade stand paper route, anything like that? And you said all of the above. So you did do lemonade stands, you did do paper routes, you grew up in New Jersey, even started a bike repair service in your basement. Tell us about all these things.
Yeah, well, one year I realized that the last bike store in my town had gone out of business. And the year before, I did a bicycle trip from New York to Seattle. And
Wow.
um, literally every piece of my bike had broken several times over. So I got to be pretty darn good at fixing my bike. And when I saw this had gone out of business, I just took out an ad and hung up, flyers around town. Again, this is before the internet. And people would come over and drop off their bikes, and I'd fix them in my basement. And I even ran it when I went to college. I sent out postcards, said, "Hey, if you want your bike repaired over, Thanksgiving or Christmas, bring it over." So that's how I got started, and it was a lot of fun.
And then you and a friend started doing ski trips to Vermont from New Jersey.
Yeah, we were in high school, and we realized we're like, hey, there used to be a ski club, but it didn't exist anymore. So we, together with a local travel agency, put together a couple of ski trips to Killington Mountain in Vermont. Those of you on the East Coast might know about it. One to Hunter Mountain, and it was called the Outer Limits Ski Club. And my understanding is, years later, that ski club still was existing in Summit High School in Summit, New
I'm
Jersey.
I'm
So yeah.
sensing a theme here. You had kind of a theme of when there's a absence in the market, you fill it by helping others, which is going to come up later because you, after college, ended up going to Sweden. I'm not sure how that came about, and there were no chocolate chip cookies in Sweden, and so you decided to do something about it.
I was living in a student dorm. I went over for a summer and I had a job driving a forklift in a beer brewery. Pretty random. Just
Hmm.
wanted to get away for the summer before I started my real job, which I actually never ended up starting. And all these people on the dorm were like, "Oh, in America, we miss this, we miss that." All these different products that you're like, "What do you mean? How do you not have peanut butter? What do you mean Levi's jeans are twice as expensive?" And someone said chocolate chip cookies. I said, "That's easy. Just go out and buy the ingredients." They said, "No, you can't even get the ingredients here." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, we have dark chocolate or milk chocolate. We don't have semi-sweet. We use sugar beets instead of cane sugar, which means our brown sugar is really dry and molassesy. Our flour kind of stinks." So I'm like, "Wow, this sounds like a job for Mark." And I've thought, and I'm like, I hate chocolate chip cookies, said no one ever. So I'm like, how can this not work? When I was back home in the States, I met with the president of David's Cookies. I got in touch with Mrs. Fields. David's wanted to sell me a recipe for $500,000. Mrs. Fields didn't do franchising. And because the cost structure, the cost of labor was so much higher in Sweden than it was at home, I figured it had to have a whole different model. So instead of building a big store like you saw in malls, I got the opportunity to open a 100 square foot kiosk in the middle of Stockholm's busiest shopping mall.
Mm.
Went and did that. The U.S. ambassador came and cut the ribbon, and
Hmm.
that store was in business for over 30 years. It just apparently closed down 2 years ago.
Wow.
So it was exciting. It was a lot of fun. I made a lot of the Swedish people a little heftier, but it was a good time.
Brought a piece of obesity from America to the Nordic countries.
And
So,
and a funny follow-on story to that is that we also introduced blueberry muffins and other muffins that didn't exist. And there was a customer that once came and he's like, "Oh, these are so good." It turns out he worked at Scandinavian Airlines, and I got a connection with Scandinavian Airlines, and I went to their commercial kitchen and literally taught a team of Swedish chefs how to make blueberry muffins. So
hmm,
at that time, we were making mixes or we were importing mixes from the States. So they became one of my biggest customers as
hmm.
I pivoted the business away from retail into wholesale. So to this day, if you fly Scandinavian Airlines from Europe to the States, you get a muffin in the morning, and that's thanks to me.
So it sounds like you were looking for other opportunities beyond the chocolate chip cookies. Like you kind of pivoted into business, selling to other businesses.
Yeah, I mean, retail is detail, like everyone says, and in especially in the CEO group you and I are both a member of, EO, we spend a lot of time talking about managing employees, making them happy, creating great culture. And when you have an hourly business such as a retail store or a restaurant, it's hard to find good, consistent people and scale that. And so I
Hmm.
was looking for a way to scale it beyond just opening more stores, and I kind of got into the business of like trading, just of selling mixes. So we sold Scandinavian Airlines, we sold to the Hard Rock Cafe, a bunch of other businesses, and that actually became the business after
Got
I'd
it.
sold off the stores. Yeah.
And you eventually come back to the United States after about 7 years in Sweden, and you get into running business development for an early internet company. They're talking like early 90s here. I'm curious what that conversation was like. Like, hey, I yeah, just ran some chocolate chip companies over in Sweden, and I'd love to do business development for you. Or, I mean, actually, I mean, when I think about it, if you're like in your by 27 or 28 now or something like that, and you've started this company, maybe that gives you a lot of credibility for these internet
Well,
companies.
yeah, there was one more stop before that. I After I sold the business, I was looking for something to do, and I applied to a Dutch-based company that had a Swedish operation called Teleworld, and they did what was called teletext advertising and information on TV. So if you've been over in Europe and you hit the button for teletext, you'll see almost like a Pong-like, display of different information. It's still a standard, it's still operating, but company I worked for commercialized it. So they were looking for a managing director to run Sweden. And I didn't have any technology experience, but as you said, had experience building and running a company. And it was myself and someone else in the final interview, and they hired me. And so I got the opportunity to take, a fledgling company. We were number 13 out of 14 countries at the time in terms of revenue, and we weren't profitable. And I turned that around, and 3 years later, we were number two,
Mm,
and we're very profitable. We had initiated a deal with MTV and with Swedish commercial broadcasters. So that experience really helped me, leverage technology as I moved back into the States. And that company in the States was building private networks. At the time, companies wanted their own networks. In the time of like AOL and CompuServe were for consumers, and then I think there was like GTE Interactive or something like that, for businesses. So we built those private label for like Price Waterhouse, for Time Warner, a bunch of large companies. So those were some of the things we did. And I remember meeting a bunch of guys from the startup called Netscape, and they had
Mm.
just come out with a new thing called the web browser.
Oh,
And I did the first
was one of
license
them
deal.
Mark Andreessen, or were they bigger than that at that point?
No, Mark Andreessen
Was one of
it wasn't with it was his biz dev guy,
okay, okay,
um, and we did the first commercial license deal of the Netscape browser. We licensed 25,000 copies of it,
wow,
for our clients, and so that was cool. And looking back, the early days of the internet, like I remember my colleague was like, "Oh, this is a good idea," and he was registering domains. You could do that for free. It was just really the Wild West,
yeah,
and it was hard to get bandwidth. I remember, it was exciting that we had a T1, which is basically a megabit a second. No house has that slow a connection
yeah.
anymore, but like that was a big deal. So yeah, it was an interesting time for sure.
You end up going and founding a company, which was VCast. What was VCast?
So the founder of that company came up with an idea of like, hey, what if we could deliver larger content to people's desktop? Because most people at that time were on dial up, hard to get something high quality. And that was just when Adobe had come out with their Acrobat product. So a lot of magazine and book publishers were making really beautiful um, products, but it took forever to download because the
Mm,
files were so large.
mm,
So we created a solution to bring in those files in the background. So you click a button and boom, you get a beautiful kind of full color file. And so one of our first large customers was the New York Times. They had a product back in the day called Times Fax. Now it's called Times Digest. Those of you who travel may recognize it. If you go to a fancy hotel, there's like a 6 or 7 page,
yeah,
8x11 version of the New York Times. Yeah.
yeah.
So back then they literally used to fax it all over the world, and they
Hmm,
had huge costs of telecom in doing that.
mm.
So we created an internet delivered version that we gave them a little piece of software, would check in and would pull down the new version, open it up, and they'd print it. And so they were like, "Wow, that's amazing! It works. It saves us so much money." So ultimately, that company we sold to Verizon, and VCast became the brand of Verizon Wireless for a while. And my partner and I were like, okay, that was cool, but we couldn't really figure out a business model. We weren't advertising people at the time. The internet was very early. People didn't understand how they'd pay for something new. And so we're like, well, what if we took the similar technology and figured out what's hard to do? Big files are hard to deliver. What files right now are big? And turned out the big files were video game PC demos. So we contacted a bunch of PC publishers, and next thing you know, we have the top 10 PC publishers as clients. We're delivering millions of files. We took away the challenge of the 95th percentile, which basically was like a variable cost to deliver, and we gave them a fixed cost. And so,
Mm.
that began my experience, in the data center world, in the bandwidth world. I learned a lot more than I really wanted to know about that whole world. But, now in my current role, that's actually serving me quite well.
I
So
would think so. Yeah, yeah,
GigX was born. And then again, we were a cloud company 10 years before cloud.
yeah.
And
No one knew
so
what a cloud was back then. Yeah,
yeah. So we said, well, they're like, well, are you going to put hardware in our back room? Where's the server? We're like, no, we're going to give you a link and you click the link and, something's going to happen. It was like, people didn't get it.
you see, yeah,
And
a lot of explanation.
a lot of explanation. The sales process was hard.
Mm,
Everyone understood internet advertising.
mm.
So I went out and acquired a content company called Game Daily. That was a business to business newsletter. And then we built a consumer brand of the same name. And we're like, let's go sell advertising. And then if you buy this amount of advertising, we'll give you our download service for free.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that's the way that worked. And that actually lubricated the business model. And in
Mm.
fact, you and I mentioned Vern Harnish earlier, and I was at one of his events with Jim Collins, talking about good to great. And Jim Collins said something about you have to disrupt yourself before you get disrupted.
Mm.
And that was kind of the epiphany for me to be like, well, the market's going to come at us. Let's us come at us first. So we
Yeah.
changed that model. Game Daily as a brand became the number one traffic gaming site in the U.S.
Hmm.
and measured by ComScore. And we ultimately were acquired by AOL, which was then a division of Time Warner. So we
Mm.
became the gaming brand of what was then the world's largest media company. So that was super exciting.
So in
Learned a
this
lot.
time period also was 9/11 and the dot-com meltdown. You're heavily into tech at this point in time. What was that like for you? Did that affect your company at the time?
Excuse me. Yeah, we definitely had two near death experiences. I mean, we had closed our funding literally the day before the stock market crashed in 2000. So
Mm.
the money was wired into our account, so we were
Wow.
okay with money. But it was a grind. And then, in 2005, 2006, the tail end of that, Silicon Valley, the San Francisco area was, it was hard. A lot of companies were closing down. A lot of companies, had just crazy expenses and weren't profitable. And I remember getting into, a pretty big conflict with our lead investor who said, you need to spend more money because the more money you lose, the better off you're going to be. And to me, that just felt like intrinsically my limbic brain said, no, that is wrong. Like I want to build a real business, right? And so we were a profitable business. I mean, we weren't as large as our competitors, but we weren't losing money. So in those times where it was lean and you just couldn't raise money, we were fine. But a
Yeah.
lot of other technology companies, learned that lesson the hard way and disappeared.
I want to ask you also about you are someone who has founded multiple companies and you've also worked inside of large companies. And a lot of people that I interview, especially entrepreneurs, really struggle with that, especially after their company is acquired. They struggle to go work within the company that acquired them. How do you think you have managed to do that?
Yeah, I think number one, that I would my advice to entrepreneurs is that I think the toughest part is really, dealing with your own identity, right? You are the founder, you
Mm,
are the CEO. Now we were part of AOL that acquired, 10, 20 companies a year.
mm,
And I was now reporting to somebody who I wouldn't have even hired, you know?
yeah.
Um, and it was hard. And also the corporate culture was like meeting after meeting after meeting. And I finally said to my boss, I said, look, I'll be on meetings that where you need me, they're important. But if I'm on all these meetings all the time, I can't get anything done. Let me do what I need to do to build the business, which is why you acquired me. And if you really need me for something, I'll be in a meeting. So
And that sounds quite tactful today. Is that how you said it at the time, or was it more, abrasive at the time, looking back on it?
I'm sure it was more abrasive. I mean, I've mellowed over the years, but
Okay.
or
It sounds quite reasonable the way you say it now.
yeah. I mean, at this guy, he was a nice enough guy. It's just I didn't want to be a jerk about it, but it
Yeah.
just there were so many other things going on, and then also when you're running a business and it's still smaller and you still have control. You can control the culture, which is incredibly important, right? We've spoken about culture a lot with entrepreneurs, with EO all over the place. So building and executing a great culture is so vital. And when you get into a big, company, your culture is subsumed. I mean, you can try and be, this way or that way. Like, when I was at Oracle, there was a company that was acquired and the founder was big into CrossFit. And he insisted on having a CrossFit gym, in the office for his
Hmm.
employees. So that was the way he kind of kept the culture, but it's hard as you
Hmm.
become part of a larger company.
Hmm.
And I think the advice I'd give to people is kind of, look out for the opportunity where you can make a mark. How can you be an entrepreneur is now you're part of a bigger company? Can you come in and take on something specific or do an initiative that's going to bring value to the champion, the person or people who said, hey, let's go acquire your company, right? Because at the end of the day, you know, there are a lot of people in these big companies that you can work with. It can be helpful further down the line. And if you're a good person, if you help them, and if you help the company, and if you're not an asshole, that will go a long way.
So one of the themes I'm hearing here is that you were involved in a lot of these companies on the bleeding edge, like bringing chocolate chip cookies to a place that had never experienced them before. Early tech companies, early internet companies, early gaming companies, and then you got involved in blockchain and crypto. So let's talk a little bit about that. How did you end up getting involved in blockchain and crypto?
Yeah, so in the early days of crypto, a lot of the early adopters were gaming people. In fact, a friend of mine, Brock Pierce, back in the day, started something called Internet Gaming Exchange, which was a marketplace where you could buy items that were hard to value, like World of Warcraft swords and characters. So I think that was really the precursor, having that sort of exchange, that kind of foreshadowed what was happening in Bitcoin. So a lot of my friends who I worked with over the years got into that. I believed in the ethos of decentralized, democratized
Finance.
payments and
Yeah,
currency
yeah.
and finance. So it made a lot of sense to me. And it also felt a lot like, the early days of the internet, which were like, hey, this time I've seen all the mistakes I've made. What if I could go back to the 1990s, but have the playbook? And that's
Right.
why I felt around crypto and blockchain. So I did a bunch of different things, advised several companies, ran business development for an exchange, and then actually ran corporate strategy for Anheuser-Busch, helping them on the non-currency side of using blockchain for tracking shipments, track and trace, for onboarding of supply chain people. So I'm still interested in that, but I'm not, that I'm not, it's not my career. I'm not active in that
Yeah.
right now. It's,
Well,
it's very volatile. It's exciting. I still think there's, a big future for digital currencies, but, there's also tremendous amount of fraud and,
right.
all sorts of craziness that
I
goes on in
mean,
that world.
so in the last couple of years, you had FTX and different exchanges that failed rather spectacularly. Blockchain went through another crypto winter and then is back up again as we record this in late 2024. It's now higher than it's ever been. Do you think that some of those applications that you were talking about, like tracking shipments, do you think that those sorts of applications will continue?
Yeah, I think the idea of kind of like a distributed ledger of not having anyone have the monopoly of truth is a good thing.
Hmm.
You think about companies where massive fraud was, created and there was no one looking at the books. You think about blockchain, it's kind of like, um, a third ledger, which is a publicly inspectable ledger. So you can see every transaction, every Bitcoin that's bought or sold is public. You can see real time. Same thing with Ethereum. So I think, yeah, there are a lot of use cases for enterprise blockchain that are not currencies. I think Bitcoin is kind of, the decentralized kind of store of value. Bitcoin hasn't yet proven that it's moving counter cyclically, to the stock market or to gold. But it's a hard asset, meaning that there's only ever going to be 21 million of them. Probably 20% of all the Bitcoins are lost forever because people have, lost their keys.
Hmm.
So, and now as we come into 25, the incoming president, Trump, has talked about creating a Bitcoin reserve in the United States. And if the United States does that, then all the other countries are going to have to follow suit. So, I mean, just pure supply and demand, if you think about it's a scarce asset, they're not making any more of it. All the largest trading companies, banks have already, set up Bitcoin trading platforms. I think the demand for Bitcoin is just going to increase. And I think ultimately the price of it is going to increase. There isn't a whole lot of utility yet for Bitcoin itself. Ethereum is a lot more, usable because it's, smart contracts and a lot of different, platforms are also quite good, like Solana or Avalanche or, um, these sorts of things. But there, thousands of different protocols. And, like a friend of mine says, who runs a great crypto podcast called Invest Answers, he says, the winners take most. So I think it's a Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, those currencies are going to be the most, interesting and valuable in the long term.
Yeah. I want to get to what you're doing now with helping other mid-sized companies to evaluate their technology options. But before we do that, almost a year ago, last April, your son was almost killed in a horrendous car crash. Talk a little bit about that impact and what that was like for you and your family.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I was away on actually an EO retreat. We were in Arizona, and I got a call from a person, a number that I didn't recognize. It turned out I said, "Who'd call me?" Sunday morning at 7:30, and a woman on the line was like, "I'm with your son. He's been in an accident.
Mm,
Let me put him on the phone." I'm like, "Oh, he's on the phone. He must be okay." Turns out the woman who saw the crash pulled over and she saw my son's car go off the road, hit a berm, fly 150 feet through the woods, crash into some small trees and bushes,
mm,
flip over a river and land
mm,
on its roof and slide
mm.
down to the river without actually going in the river. Miraculously, and then unfortunately, when he crashed through a fence, there's a large metal pole, like this far
Mhm.
around, that went through his body on the right
Mm.
side, but miraculously avoided his vital organs, his lungs, didn't break any bones. And so she, the first person on site, was a nurse. Her
Oh,
husband called in the life flight, CHP. From the time of the accident, he was actually in the operating room within an hour. And
mm,
so it was a miracle. The
mm.
car, was going very fast. Like I said, landed on its roof. It was a Tesla. It did its job. The car was totally destroyed. But besides being impaled by that metal pole, he had no broken bones.
Incredible.
So it
Wow.
was incredible.
The
And,
woman, did the woman hand him the phone thinking that he was a goner and just like, giving you the opportunity to talk to him? What was that like?
I don't know. I don't know. But
Mm,
like he was conscious when she got to the car. He was hanging upside down, you know, um,
mm,
and he undid his seatbelt and he twisted around to come right side up. So he was like, a chicken on a spit. He
mm.
flipped so
Oh,
he was right side up. But luckily the first responders got there. They cut him out of the car and they had to extract this metal pole from him in surgery. But everything happened so quickly, and he had a tough recovery. Um, he was home here convalescing for like 6 weeks. He was able to walk in his college graduation. And, amazingly, he's made a full recovery. And I think we all were just really so grateful that, in the blink of an eye, everything can change. And,
yeah.
we know that kind of as a cliche, but it really was true. And, I really kind of had the big epiphany of like, just having him sit on the couch and being here, and we don't have to say anything, just having him there was such an enormous gift.
Mm,
And to me, that really was just a wake up moment to be like, just be incredibly grateful for the mundane, everyday stuff. Don't scream at your kid because they knocked over a bowl of whatever. It's like, whatever, they're here with you, sort of thing.
yeah.
And, unfortunately, I know plenty of people who've had, terrible losses, in their families. And we just were incredibly lucky
Yeah.
that he's with us. And, he just graduated. He's now looking for, his first role out of college. So, I think I'm a lot more humble, a lot more grateful, you
Yeah,
know,
for sure. Yeah, I remember I met your son at an event about a month before that. So devastating to see the news when it came out. I remember seeing the pictures that you shared, and it was just yeah, it does make you grateful for sure.
yeah.
Let's wrap up with you talking a little bit about some of the work that you do now. So helping mid-sized companies, giving them, looking at some areas that maybe companies, as they grow, they don't go back and look at, what their technology stack is costing them, and it can be significant. These things that kind of grow and you don't notice it.
Absolutely. I mean, most people don't realize that the cost of technology in their business sometimes is the largest cost, oftentimes the second largest cost. And I'll give you an example. Like when two companies merge, how do you make sure you're on the same communication system? Does everyone have the right security protecting the company? If you're in the cloud, how many licenses do you really need? How do you optimize that? We have a client now that the cost of their public cloud, like an AWS or a Google Cloud or an Azure, this particular company, their costs went up 1,000% in a year
Mm.
because of so much usage. So for them, the right answer is not just being all in on a public cloud, but having some stuff in a private cloud, some stuff on a public cloud. So we bring in subject matter experts that help them basically do an audit and look at what they're doing and give them advice, objective advice on what would work. So we have over 300 partner vendor companies we work with. We're agnostic as to who they choose. We just want you, the leader, to be happy. And so we're offering, mid-sized and enterprise companies, free technology assessment. They can just, send me an email, Mark at gigex, gigex.com, or see our website, gigex.com. And, we're happy to help you think about the different things going on, the different options that are in the business, and help you be smarter about that and plan for the future. And we do that from a business owner's perspective. We're not like, okay, the best technology is this or that. Well, the best technology, quote unquote, may not be the best fit for you, right?
Mm.
And for example, now everyone's talking about AI. One of the first great implementations of AI is around, customer facing stuff, like in a contact center. So
Mm.
now a lot of these contact center products have automated agents that can help customers in a really friendly way, not press one for this or two for that.
Right.
And they've really come a long way. So,
In a
there's
short
great.
period of time, I'll add, because so many different platforms now, the first line of customer support that you get is some kind of chatbot or something like that. And frankly, I'm kind of surprised when they don't work that well, because so often now they seem to work well right off the bat.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is because a lot of people are hesitant to trying something new, which is understandable. But I mean, when you see one of these products working and helping, helping patients in a medical office make appointments or change appointments in a way that feels human, or communicating with you how you want. You might want a WhatsApp message. Your colleague might want a text. Someone else may want messenger. Someone else may want voice. So having that kind of omni-channel ability to communicate is essential. And, at the end of the day, customers care about how they're treated by a company. And it's unacceptable for someone to be, on hold or not get an answer or not be able to, get something resolved in a world of social and instant,
Right.
Twitter, and, that can really be damaging. So I think
Right.
those are the type of things that, companies really need to think about and invest in.
Mark, this has been such a so great hearing your stories and everything. And I'd like to wrap up with my gratitude question. So I'm a big fan of giving guests the space to acknowledge anyone that's been helpful in their journey, especially peers or contemporaries. Who would you want to shout out?
Yeah, there was, this company I went to work with in New York. The co-founder, his name was Christian, and he was from Switzerland, and he gave me a shot. I really didn't know anything about how am I going to work in an internet company. I barely knew what the internet was or how to spell it, sort of thing. And he gave me that shot. And then he and I went off and did VCast, and then we did GigX. So, I mean, without that first opportunity, I really wouldn't have taken that kind of entrepreneurial technology path. And, for that, I'm always grateful.
So cool. Mark, where can people go to learn more about you and GigX?
Yeah, so they can find anything they want about GigX at gigex.com, gigex.com. And I'm Mark at gigex.com. My socials are primarily LinkedIn. I keep most of my stuff to business. I do a little bit of stuff on X, not a whole heck of a lot. But yeah, LinkedIn, you can find me there. Instagram's kind of, silly stuff, travel stuff. But yeah, happy to be of service to anyone out there. And, also as a passion project, I work with some CEOs. I advise, a couple CEOs here and there, just as kind of part of my giving back, because I love helping people build and scale and do great things and do things they're passionate about.
Mark, thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.